If there's a piece of endgame content that both MMO and looter shooter grinders out there work towards, it's the boss fights. You gather your team, your best loot and strategies, and engage in one of the highest challenges that test your investment. For a few years now, I've attempted day 1 raids in Destiny 2, and for all those who know the 48-hour contest mode, it ain't easy. It runs your sleep schedule and mental into the ground, but when you kill that final boss, the level of joy is unforgettable. I hate myself enough to do it, and even with the final shape, I'll be running it back one more time at the end of this 10-year-long road. However, we aren't here to talk about me today. Instead, we're looking at Shangri Frontier coming off the recent conclusion of arguably one of the best VR MMORPG boss fights I've seen in anime. Now, I know some of you all are looking at the screen sideways and thinking about SAO, Excel World, and of course Log Horizon, especially with how their fights are structured like a Final Fantasy raid. Yet, our trio versus the unique monster Weathermon the Tome Guard took a fresh approach when it comes to the conditions of clearing a fight while also providing circumstances that raise the stakes to an absurdly amusing bar. With the organization of the fight hitting home for the gamers and the anime's own spin making the fight seemingly almost impossible to conquer, you find yourself impressed with how much this show just gets it. To break it down and elaborate upon how well the assignment is understood, we naturally start with the preparation and established conditions information before the battle. As told earlier within the series, unique monsters are unpredictable and in some ways could be seen as unfair to go up against. Spawn conditions, abilities, and clear conditions are unknown off the wiki and can only be learned through trial and error. As elaborated upon from Pencilgon, one of the main debuffs of this encounter is that all player levels are reduced to 50, with the boss being at 200. A whopping 150 level difference, and if that isn't enough, then how about any stat points applied after level 50 are lost, adding a nice cherry on top. This of course led to our loud and proud duo grinding to 50 in the earlier episodes, but also set a precedent going into this fight. When dealing with a boss, you naturally have a balance of roles ranging from tanks and healers to your close and range DPS with a few glass cannons spread throughout. With our trio, we're working with purely close and mid-range DPS, which moves the battle from what could have been the usual setup to a reactionary standpoint based purely on player skill. Surviving, parrying, dodging, and applying damage where they can is the key to victory, and even then, the clear conditions aren't about chipping away from the HP bar either. This leads into the core structure of the fight being broken up into phases, each with their own conditions and those who will tackle those said conditions. Mechanics throughout a raid or boss fight can have multiple conditions in terms of what needs to be done in order to make it out alive. Is there a certain enemy needed to be killed, symbols or a pattern initiated, a resource taken and deposited? The range of creativity is boundless and is only limited to the setting and the lore presented within the enemy in front of you. When it comes to Weathermon, he's got 3 total phases, each spanning along a time limit. Phase 1 grants the boss super armor, which indicates damage reduction and cancels out almost all attacks. Furthermore, magic and debuffs have no effect, and aggro will always be linked to the player closest to him. Side note, but because of his grave protecting duties, any players near the grave of his love would take priority over the player nearest to him. In this initial phase, the players would need to survive the time limit of 10 minutes, making it to phase 2. Phase 2 entails that Weathermon will then summon a horse mount named Kieran that must be prevented from merging with the boss. If so, the encounter will become increasingly hard, allowing Weathermon increased mobility. This phase must also be survived for 10 minutes. Now phase 3 kicks off with a wide AoE attack that must be interrupted in order to survive. Interruption can be dealt with either a high-powered attack or with an item that harms the very nature of the boss itself, given he is undead. If the attack is survived, new abilities will begin to be used, but Weathermon will also begin to lose HP every second, which must be survived for 10 minutes. However, even this will still not defeat him. The true condition is that all players must survive the Clear Sky Conquest and the Sky Clear Slash. If one player dies and is revived, the encounter will restart all over again. This one boss has our trio dancing along to the tune of the 3 phases of death, and each of them are tackled with emphasis for player skill at the front. Phase 1 is a matter of trial and error, which is handled by Sonraku. With dual wield and high reflexes to dodge and parry, what better way to survive than somebody with the ability to learn on the go in such close quarters while also having the resources to defend themselves. Plot armor is nowhere to be found, as even if it is the main character, there are plenty of times throughout this fight he is cut down over and over and revived via teammates with an item as they hang on the sidelines without pulling aggro. It's a pretty simple strategy to start out with, giving Sonraku a feel for what he's working with and the wall he needs to adapt to. His offensive playstyle is now about countering. In the entire 10 minutes, we see him do what he does best, with an equally inviting and yet cautious mindset given the one-shot kill slash. While unable to deal direct damage, staggering mechanics are in place, and the best way to completely alter a samurai's playstyle is to remove the weapon of choice from his hands, which comes into play for some time as the countdown continues. If there's 3 things Sonraku Sonraku's got going for him when it comes to his stats, it's his high damage output, agility, and luck, in which 2 out of the 3 allows the first encounter to be cleared. Running the clock down is not always as easy as it may sound, given the level of concentration and attack patterns needed to be memorized, but for somebody like Sonraku who has been through a whole lot worse in the form of a hobby, the true depiction of skill is on full display, thus furthering why regardless of him being the main character, he is the ideal person to maintain aggro like this. Now phase 2 is where the party gets fully active, with Oikatsu and Arthur keeping aggro on Kirin while Sonraku continues another round of a back and forth deathmatch with Weathermon for an additional 10 minutes. Now unlike the super armor, Kirin is vulnerable to crowd control abilities and even damage. This prompts Oikatsu to try out a game of tug of war to keep it still, and Arthur to get her own plan into action. In terms of item usage, it's important to discuss the reward scales used by Arthur as one of the aspects that adds a bit of uniqueness to the battle with a sense of high risk and high reward. By sacrificing expensive items in one end of the scale, she is able to acquire something else to help secure the battle victory. In this case, items worth a total of 300 million in-game currency is the equivalent of 300 stat points, which lasts the duration of the fight. For Sonraku, both agility and luck go higher, and considering he's more so on the counter than the offensive, this is a huge gamble that puts even more emphasis on his survival and some serious respect on Arthur's name for what she is willing to sacrifice for the team to make it. A clever bypass that manages to stay balanced, as stats aside, it still doesn't fully close that stat gap. Now one momentary dilemma occurring within phase 2 is the fact that chaos and momentum can be thrown off course by anything. The key to this battle isn't just surviving, but maintaining a consistent application of enemy aggro, which can be thrown off depending on the distance from the target. At one point, Sonraku does lose aggro by dodging, which puts Arthur in the hot seat for a brief moment, causing Sonraku to sacrifice himself pre-revive in order to get the battle back on track in terms of who is targeting what. As quick as it may have happened, moments of chaos are much more common in these big fights, as there is a lot going on at one time and the littlest thing can throw the whole operation off balance. It's important to depict these moments, as given the amount of stakes and resources put into this fight, the train drifting off from the tracks even for a second keeps the audience hooked. It would feel cheap and a bit too convenient if there was a way to bypass some of these debuffs, but player movement and focus be too perfect that everything would go according to plan phase by phase. In terms of keeping the horse occupied for the remaining section of the phase from this particular point onwards, Oikatsu straps themselves to the horse's face with the very same tug-of-war ropes, which to be honest is pretty in character given how they interact, and to be frank, who cares how silly it is? If it works, then it works. If that were me, I'd do anything to make it work too, thus leading the team into the kickoff for the final phase. As I mentioned in the beginning, encounters are learned through trial and error, and one of the trials Arthur had with her own team was witnessing the AoE attack that wiped her entire team out come the first attempt to defeat this boss. At the time, there was no sure way to know what exactly would work to stop the attack, but as all trial and error, there comes a learning experience. Her holy water, which could be seen as poison to the undead, was the perfect item needed to stagger the AoE attack. It goes to show how once again Arthur came prepared with both items and tools necessary to survive the encounter. As somebody who leads people himself in these types of endgame content, you can never skip out on the prep, and I appreciate the showcase of its value. The final portion to this fight involves phase 3's opportunity to send this whole thing packing with a bang. In this phase, Weathermon uses new abilities which Sonraku has to adapt to while preparing to fend off the Clear Sky combo, and Kirin mechanizes into a giant mech that finally opens up the ability to do heavy damage due to identifying a crit location. Considering that most of the fight has been about surviving, a sense of satisfaction makes itself present when our party can finally do a little damage back. As for the final preparations, alongside a helmet adjustment, Sonraku finally is able to unveil his Togetsu blades, while Oikatsu consumes a big gamble of an item that grants them insane buffs but at the cost of losing 1 level every 30 seconds. All the stops being pulled out with some really cool character acting and details to go alongside it. On Sonraku's side, the dial is turned up to 10, dodging a vast array of attacks and even getting hit with rooted abilities that guarantee his death. With the only way to clear the encounter being everyone must survive the slash, it sets up a countdown with a powerful parry awaiting at the buzzer. Now this whole video would suck if I didn't mention the self-revive plays, as it's rare to see such fun player finesse occur in such a huge way, and it's arguably one of the highlights of phase 3. While the timer is being burned, Oikatsu and Arthur go straight up hammer and nail. Arthur creating the opportunity needed to bring the mech down once and for all, sacrificing spears in exchange to extend her root ability time, and even using one of her most powerful in order to finally crack the armor of such a powerful mount. Oikatsu delivering the final blow straight out of the One Punch handbook, and after a long and grueling fight, finally bringing the mount to its end. It goes without saying, but the MVP in this entire fight is Arthur. There's been a lot of gambles at play, but it's just so badass to see the level of effort put into clearing one of these, and you really gotta respect the hard work put in. As for the grand finale, I think it speaks for itself, with some Raku delivering a parry so powerful that it shattered the armor of the Tomb Guard, clearing the condition of surviving the insta-kill slash and thus concluding the fight for our party. Again, player smarts making its way to the big moment as Sunraku divulged in what I label as a post-patch power play, where the latest update of the game allowed a new condition of surviving with 1 HP if the damage was self-inflicted and if your luck stat met the requirements. The low HP status triggering multiple buffs for the final attack and thus finally overcoming the Clear Sky Conquest with a heck of a gamble at large. There are multiple avenues to beat a boss sometimes, and this fight proves that not all the time is beating their HP to 0 the only way to go about it while still offering an engaging exchange. This right here is how you present a boss fight with a conclusion that measures up to all the effort put in without making it purely an aggressive victory. The amount of items used, terminology throughout the fight, phases causing adjustments to playstyle and intense moments, and of course conditions of success truly engraved the idea of a challenge within this boss battle. This wasn't something that could have been beaten with the power of plot armor, nor by the basis of the OP protagonist. Shangri-La Frontier humbled itself by introducing a trio who, while being unusual to the average player mindset, prioritized the player's skill and hard work honed over the course of many games to finally be recognized at the height of a true challenge. You bring your best and only your best to the table and nothing less, which in my eyes is exactly what the grinding experience is all about in the end. The icing on the cake looking beyond all of this is the post-endgame content. Adding some type of new chase is the exact type of enticing content that incentivizes players to keep coming back, and it's a crucial aspect of keeping live service games alive and healthy. What even makes this better is that the success is announced to the entire game and everybody knows who they are. In terms of lying low, it's quite inconvenient, but for the audience and myself, you can't help but smile knowing that these characters are getting the recognition they deserve and it won't be some unspoken heroic. It's another reason why I'm fond of the SAO Mother Rosario arc, as being able to engrave your name in gaming history deserves the hype, and that's how legends are born. With all that being said, you don't get this much level of quality for anime centered around games much these days, and it's no wonder this series is highly regarded. With the season wrapping up, you best believe that we'll be having some serious talks about what the best gaming anime is, and if these boss fights manage to raise the bar higher and higher for each unique monster, then I think the conversation will have a clear victor in the end. And with that brings me to the end of this video. As always, thank you for watching, and make sure to let me know how you feel about this fight in the comment section down below. Stay safe out there, and I will catch you all in the next video.